do I understand there's a link between life, science and religion? Because, I mean, science encompasses all life, because it's asking deep fundamental questions of who we are and trying to explain it into a scientific process. Religion is trying to do it from a different entity completely, but is trying to explain where God is. By religion, I would try and say where God is in everything. So I think they'd be complementary rather than necessarily it's. Would you try and write a love story in mathematical formula? Within science, as my understanding, I'm not a scientist. That's my only science background is that which I learnt at school. But the one thing I did learn about science in school is to ask questions, and to constantly ask questions of the process that we'll be given. So I think when science comes forward with a new idea, embryonic research, the ability to affect human life, then religion, if you want to use that word, or the church, or people of faith, have a right to challenge science and its context within humanity.
I think that what we should recognise is that that religion is about how to be, and science is about what is. And those are two separate questions, and they're like it's like, you know, a Venn diagram with overlapping circles. Well, these circles don't overlap at all. So in this circle you've got religion, which is what it is to be a good person. I think that's what religion is about. And in this other area, in this other field, is, you know, what makes solid objects solid, and how do things change in time and so on. And I don't think those are religious questions. So there are questions about factual things, objects, and there are questions about virtues. And I think religion is about virtues and science is about objects. And where you get the conflict is when science tries to deal with things that are about virtues, and religion tries to deal about things with their objects, and that's where the conflict arises.
That what I understand of Darwin's theory of evolution, and I'm not a scientist, okay, and I know that some scientists out there would question that, or do question the theory of evolution, though the majority wouldn't. What I do understand of it, I'm happy with. I'm happy with that it describes the process of life evolving, but it doesn't take away from the opening sentence of the book of Genesis, which is, in the beginning, there was God. And from there, how that develops, I'm quite happy. You could actually challenge Darwin of saying, actually, Genesis pre-described evolution, because if you look at how it's described in the book of Genesis, with the exception of one day, the way that Darwin explains how the world was formed step by step, and the evolution, okay, maybe we put a couple of million years between each of the days, but actually it's the same steps as lives are formed.
You know, we have to look at the context in which those people lived and in which those books were written. The books weren't written by God. The books were written by people who might have been, you know, hot-wired to God, but they're nevertheless written by people, and those people are writing in a context, and we have to see what that context was. And in that context, their stories made a lot of sense. But after 2,000 years of science, those stories don't make scientific sense. They still make sense. They don't make scientific sense, but they make virtuous sense. You know, what is the hidden meaning of the Garden of Eden? And there is a profound hidden meaning if you want to look for it.
The student union here, while I was here, if you were going to stand on the platform of better parties, as in student parties, as in alcohol and dance parties, you're more likely to be elected president than and you'll capture the students' imagination than you would if you were discussing political matters. And I think with organised religion it's exactly the same thing. However, if I was to say about spirituality and about meeting the student as the individual and what made them tick, then they are interested, but are still switched on by the difficult questions and about life, whether that's within religion, science, or anything else.
I came across something yesterday which was great. It was about how modern youth are really a waste of breath. All they want to do is go down the pub and drink and carouse and generally lie about and not do anything. And this is what old folks say about modern youth. And that was written 6,000 years ago. So nothing has changed. You know, the same people believe in the same things all the time.
The Assyrian creation stories, which predate early Babylon, well before the Genesis stories were written, there are some strands, and certainly some of the ideas behind those early Assyrian stories lead into the book of Genesis. You can see that they've got some idea. Whether the early Egyptians called it something and whether the Assyrians called it something else, that something of the other I call God. Because actually to me there is this other thing called God, from which I come from and from which I will return to.
Science will never phase out religion. There will always be conflicts where people interpret the books of religions literally, because that's where these two diagrams overlap. So science knows about the origin of species. We know where species come from. And if a holy book tries to tell us something different from that truth, then there's something wrong. Not wrong with the holy book. There's nothing wrong with the holy book. What is wrong is the way the holy book is being interpreted. That's what's wrong. So if you interpret the holy book as allegories that help us to know how to be, then these overlaps don't occur, and then there's no conflict. So it's trying to read a holy book as a scientific text is a bad thing. Trying to read a scientific book as an ethical or moral text is a bad thing. Separate the two and you've got two good things.
My understanding is 20, 30 years ago we thought science would answer everything. To some extent, science has given us more problems as well as answers to questions. We live longer because of science, which is fantastic, until you sit with the 80-year-old who actually wants to die. Science has given us unlimited nuclear power, and the next 30 generations with nuclear waste that is going to pollute the environment. Is science good? In the right hands, yes. In the wrong hands, no. Religion, is it good? For me personally, ultimately, yes. In the wrong hands, when misused, it's caused great carnage and destruction.